Hey guys, CBHolo1 here. Welcome back to another video, and today we have something a little different. I'm going to be showing you guys how to ballast. In my case, this is Atlas track, but really you can do it on any type of track without roadbed. So before we get started, I just want to say that this video is only going to be showing you guys how to ballast like curved and straight tracks. It's not going to be showing switches. I will be eventually making a video on how to ballast switches because I plan on figuring that out. But switches they're a little bit more complicated than straight and curved tracks, so that's going to be its whole other thing. But yeah, so let's get right into the supplies I'm going to be using. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to be using is this stuff. This is wet water, as opposed to, dry water. It's tap water with a couple drops of dish soap in it. And I'm going to be using this to replace isopropyl alcohol, which is what most people use, and like if you look up a lot of tutorials, they'll be using isopropyl alcohol. This is cheaper than isopropyl alcohol, so I'm going to use it, and it does the same thing. Maybe not as well, but if you have a thick enough spray of it, it works just as well. Basically, what this is meant to do is this breaks the surface tension of like the gravel, and it allows the glue to soak in. And speaking of glue, the glue I'm using is this. This is Elmer's school glue, and I got this for about $15 for this gallon, and it works very well. I haven't had any issues with it so far. And what I do with it is I make a 50-50 mix of glue, or roughly 50-50. It actually has a little bit more water than glue, but it's basically a 50-50 mix of Elmer's glue and water, and this creates a scenic glue. Basically, this is what you drip on top of the ballast, and that secures it down. Now, if you have an eyedropper, use that instead. I have this thing, which has the cap is one of those where like you screw it down to tighten it and close it off. And I just loosen it enough, that way when you squeeze the trigger, it only drips, but an eyedropper would be a lot easier, but I don't have one. So I'm going to be using the spray bottle instead. You're also going to need a brush. This is used to like just spread the ballast around and make the embankments on the side. You're also going to need quite a few paper towels. This is to wipe down the track so that when you get the glue on it, because that will happen as much as you may try to not get glue on the rails, you're gonna get glue on the rails. And if you don't get glue on the rails, you're going to at least get the soapy water on the rails, which isn't as bad, but, you probably will want to wipe it up anyway. Then we have this stuff. This is the main ingredient. This is not, in fact, Woodland Scenic's Fine Ballast Gray Blend. This is Paver Set Polymeric Sand in a 40-pound bucket. Basically, this was about $20. I got it from Lowe's. And it's a lot of gravel. You do have to sift out the large bits so that like you get this finer blend, but once you do that, you get a really nice consistency for ballast. And if you want to, you can keep going finer and finer, and you can get different scales. So if you're doing HO, you just filter out more of the bigger stones, and then you get a finer blend. And to do that, I have this little sifter thing here. I don't know if it's called a sifter or a colander. It's a kitchen thing, and I use it to get that out and scoop this thing. And I have refilled this thing multiple times so far. So I'm saving, you save a lot of money by getting this stuff instead of buying like Woodland Scenic's ballast. So most of my track is already ballasted. It's really like this kind of section between the crossover that's over here and the switch that goes into the siding over there, and the center siding bit that isn't ballasted, but the center bit's another story. So we're going to start with this section, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our ballast, and we're going to take our brush, and we're going to start spreading the ballast around. Alright, so I'm going to open up the spoon side of the shaker here. And I'm just going to kind of lay it out. I'm only going to do one curve track section right now. And then, so once you put down the ballast, you just take your brush and you slowly go over it, trying to reveal or at least what I do, is I try and reveal just the top of the ties. So there's a little bit of a recess between the top of the ballast and the actual ties, but it's not a lot. So once you do that and you get it to the level that you want, you can start adding ballast to the edges. Now, as you can see, we already have some here. So I'm just going to take the shaker and I'm going to put a little bit more over here on this side. And then we use a similar process, except I'm going to turn the brush sideways here and run it along the top of the ties. And these are going to have, like the side ties are going to have a little bit more of a recess than the middle. And if you need more ballast on the ties, that's fine. You just shake on a little bit more, get it off the rails, and then smooth it out. And then what I do is I take the brush and I kind of stipple it, I guess, along the edges, and it kind of smooths out the edge so that it looks a little smoother. But you just do that down the length of track that you're ballasting. And if you have like excessively thick spots where like you feel like the ballast goes out a little too far, you just take the edge of it and you brush it down the track to a spot where you feel is too thin, and you stipple it to smooth it out. And then we're going to repeat the same process on the other side. Alright, so when you want to add a little bit more ballast, because, you know, you're eventually going to need to cover your entire track, all you do is the exact same process that you did before. I'm going to do the center first. You can do the center and the outside at the same time. I like doing just the center because it's a little bit neater and it's a little bit easier. So once you've added it to the center, what I do is I brush it back over the section that I already put stones on just a little bit, just to kind of fill in some gaps that I may have missed, as it is on the edge of the previous section that I ballasted. And then again, it's the same process where you brush the ballast down the track, revealing just a little bit of the top of the ties, and then you do the edges. And then straight tracks use the exact same process. Now it is worth noting that sometimes you'll get, like, no matter how much sifting you do, you'll get large rocks that don't look that realistic. So what I do is I just pick them out with my fingers and put them on the side of the track and then blend them in, because they look a little bit better on the edges than they do in the middle. I don't know why, but they do, so that's what I do. And it's doing this as I'm being picky here. You do need to make sure that when you're getting close to switches and whatnot, I mean, I'll cover it more when I end up doing switches, that you don't get the gravel in, like, in the frogs, because that will kind of mess up how the engine runs over it. And just like that, you now have some ballasted track. Now, this section was left open. This is going to be a platform. There's a station off camera, right about, like, over here, that is going to have a concrete platform in front of it. And I want the concrete platform to go right up to the rail, so I didn't put any ballast here. In fact, I'm probably going to end up vacuuming up all the loose ballast that's, like, just kind of sitting over here on the edge, because this will eventually be a platform, and I think it would look good if the platform went all the way up to the tracks instead of having it go up to some ballast, where then the passengers would have to step over the ballast onto the train. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to finish the part that you can't see that's not ballasted, that is in that direction, and we will go from there. Alright, so we now have some ballasted track. So the next step in our process here is going to be to glue all this down, that way it doesn't go anywhere. So we're going to be using the wet water, and we're going to be spraying down the ballast with a very heavy coat of the wet water, and then we're going to take our glue mixture and we're going to glue everything down so nothing goes anywhere. Alright, so this is probably a good time to point out that I am using paper grass. This is, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know I prefer this because it's cheap, it's fast, and it's easy, and, you know, I don't want to spend all the money to do it properly, so I'm using this, and I'm going to do my darndest to make it look good. But one thing you have to note when you're using this is that when you spray it down with the water, the paper will, like, kind of crumple up. And if you're not careful with the glue, you will end up keeping those crinkles. You can kind of see it here where I missed a little bit and the grass is kind of bumpy. If you don't hit that area with the glue, it will level out. It won't be absolutely perfect, but it'll definitely look better after everything's dried and the grass is dried up than it will when you initially spray it down. So if you're using paper grass and you spray it down, everything starts crinkling up, don't panic. You just have to give it time to dry, and it will fix itself. Alright, now let's say you have some rather intricate scenery or some signaling or something down here that you do not want to get wet. There's two things you can do. You can mask it, or you can use a more fine applicator. So I have been using this thing. It's good for getting close and spraying it. You can also use an eyedropper. Now, an eyedropper is preferred because you have a lot more control over it, and you don't risk it getting on the grass, and if you're using paper grass, then it won't, like, crumple up as much. But yeah, so if you're trying to avoid getting things wet, those are your solutions. Alright, so I'm going to be doing one track at a time. I find that doing like one piece of track at a time is good because if you try and do too much at once, if you're using isopropyl alcohol or wet water, it will likely evaporate before you get the glue over there because it does take a little bit of time to actually get the glue in the right place. If you're using a pipette, it'll probably go a little bit faster, but with the technique that I'm using with the spray bottle, it's much easier just to do one track at a time. So that's what I'm going to be doing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to spray it down with the wet water, and then we're going to hit it with the glue. Alright, so I got my little spray here. So again, I'm going to give it a rather thick coat. And I'm going to overlap the track a little bit, just so that I can have the glue go over, and I can get all the way up to the edge of the track. So now that I've sprayed that down, we're going to take our glue bottle and we're going to drip it. And the reason I'm doing this in so many like broken shots, if you're wondering, is because like I don't want to screw it up, because I can really only do this one time per section of track, because I can't like unglue it without going through some rather extensive processes. Alright, so I got my glue bottle here, and I'm just going to squeeze the trigger. Again, I have the nozzle tightened down enough that it just drips. If I press it too fast, it'll end up spraying everywhere, but I've got a paper towel in my other hand in case that happens, so that I can quickly wipe it up off of the paper grass. Because again, if you hit the paper grass while it's wet with the glue mixture, it will end up gluing the paper grass with the crinkles in it. So again, I'm trying to cover every little bit of it. And this is what the wet water does. So you can see how it's kind of soaking into the ballast. If you didn't have the wet water applied or the isopropyl alcohol, the glue would beat up on top, and then it would just run off down the ballast. And that wouldn't be good, because then it takes some of the ballast with it, and it doesn't actually soak in and glue anything down. It just kind of sits there, which isn't what we want. So try and get it between the ties on the outside and on the inside and on the opposite side, which I'm not going to do now. And again, it's the same process for the straight tracks. Find your section of straight, spray it down, making sure to cover everything, that way the glue soaks in correctly. And you may notice that on my switches, I do have the wires exposed while I'm spraying it down with the water. When you use this technique, you probably will not be able to run trains until everything dries. So just keep that in mind, because you will be running it over wet rails and you'll be running it over glue, and that's not good. So after I'm done gluing all this down and everything dries, and before I go to run trains, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Scotch-Brite pad and I'm going to rub that over all of the track. That way I can get off any extra glue or anything that dried on top of it, or any residue that's left from the soap or anything. So I'm going to go and finish this off camera. Alright, so I have glued down the entire section here. I didn't do what I did with the ballasting because it's not as enjoyable to watch just dripping glue on top of track. But anyway, so now that this is glued down and it is wet and the rails are still a little tacky, which we'll fix with the Scotch-Brite pad, we're going to let this dry. Now, I let all of the other track dry overnight, and I'm probably going to do the same for this. Now, keeping in mind it's like noon. So this is going to have a long time to dry, and that's not a bad thing. It's never a bad thing to let things dry for too long, unless you're planning on manipulating it while it's drying, which I'm not going to be doing. So the next step is to do a little cleanup. As you can see here, there's a lot of rocks between the rails, so we're going to go to a different part of the layout that's already been done, and we're going to do a little bit of cleanup work there. Alright, so here's one I prepared earlier. Both of these tracks are ballasted, glued, and completely dried, and as you can see, there's a bunch of rocks in the middle here. Now, we're going to vacuum these up, but the problem is some of these are going to be stuck to the grass. Now, this is one of the advantages to paper grass, and that is that I don't have to worry about scraping these up and scraping up any scenery that's underneath of it. And if you're not using paper grass, I highly recommend ballasting your tracks and then doing ground cover, because you can kind of bleed the ground cover on top of the tracks a little bit. You cannot have the ground cover and then try and rip this up, because if this is glued down, you're going to end up taking some of the ground cover with it. So the way you can break it apart is you can either use your finger and you can scrape it and kind of break it up into the middle so that you can vacuum it up, or you can take the brush that you've been using and you can sweep along the edges of the ballast to break up any extra stuff that you don't want. This is another way to clean up the edges of where you've ballasted to make it a little bit more straight. But once you've done that, you're going to come in with your vacuum cleaner and you're going to vacuum it all up. And just like that, you now have some very nice looking ballasted track without roadbed. Now, the reason I'm not using roadbed is because roadbed is expensive, and for the amount of money I'm saving without using roadbed, I can deal with the bit of height difference that's associated with it that makes it look a little bit more realistic. But honestly, I don't think this looks too bad. Now, if you guys end up using this technique on your layout, let me know in the comments, and let me know how it goes. For me, this isn't that difficult, and I have almost no experience with ballasting. This is a brand new technique that I really started using yesterday, as of this video being recorded, and as you can see, it really doesn't look horrible. So I hope you guys have similar successes, and I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you all learned something. So anyway, I am CW Hollow 1, and have a good day, or maybe good night in your case. See ya.